All right, so good afternoon, everybody. Today we're going to talk about Biology Unit 1, and the focus is on biomolecules. So our objective is students can compare functions of different biomolecules and identify roles of enzymes. And this is covering TEKS 9A and 9C. So let's keep on rolling. And so the first thing we have is the elements of life. And so you'll hear this acronym called CHOMPS. And so it's carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, then nitrogen, phosphorus, sulfur. So carbon, hydrogen, oxygen are the most common because those are everything is made of those three elements typically. Nitrogen, phosphorus, and sulfur are more towards proteins and your nucleic acids. Okay, and so let's move on to biomolecules. What are biomolecules? Well, bio means life, and molecules are what we're made of. And so these are what living things are made of. And you will see them in animals and plants and humans and fungi and mushrooms and things like that. So they're all biotic or living organisms. And so the list is we have carbohydrates. You've probably heard of these. They're pastas, breads, and grains. If you get your shirts starched, that's a carbohydrate that they put on your shirt. And the big role for carbohydrates is to store energy and provide energy to the body. And we have simple carbohydrates, which are like simple sugar. Like if you go eat a teaspoon of sugar, or you eat a lollipop, or you eat candy, those are usually simple sugars that your body uses the energy very quickly and then it goes away. We also have complex sugars or complex carbohydrates, and those would be like pastas and breads. And so grains, if you ever watch like professional runners, they'll do what they call carb loading day before their race or a couple days before their race, in that they're going to load up on these complex carbs and store that energy. And then the day of the race, as they have to go 26 miles, which is a marathon, then they're going to be able to do that because they'll have those carbs to burn as their body's using that energy. So starches are also part of carbohydrates. So there's starches and sugars, and we talk about simple and complex. We have lipids. So lipids is our second biomolecule we're going to talk about. And so lipids is basically fats. So the term liposuction would be the removal of fat. Lip or lipo is fat in Latin. And so lipids also provide some form of energy, although not as much as carbohydrates and not as well as carbohydrates. If you ever notice, if you get fat or fluffy, it's harder for your body to get rid of fat because you have to burn it a lot differently through the body, a different process to burn that fat off. And so it provides energy, but not as great. It also provides steroids, and when they say steroids, we're talking about steroids your body uses and needs. Lipids are found when we talk about, when we get into cell membrane, and we start talking about parts of the cell, you'll see more lipid involvement. And so just a kind of a history thing, if you've ever noticed, like with Indians or with maybe back in the olden days, they would use things like buffalo wax or whale blubber to rub on top of fabric, and that would make it waterproof. And so that's one of the things you can do. You can take a candle, you can rub it on top of fabric, and it will make it predominantly waterproof, depending on what the candle's made of. Okay. And then if you want to learn a big word, saponification is how you turn fats into soap. And so then our third biomolecule are proteins. And so we have proteins like hemoglobin, which is found in your blood that carries oxygen out throughout your blood. We have amylase, which is it breaks down sugar in your intestinal tract. And so proteins do lots of different things. So they do provide some energy, but they also are transporters within the body. They speed up reactions, which we'll talk about specifically, called enzymes. They provide structural support, and they also are part of the hormones within our body. And then lastly, we have nucleic acids. So mostly DNA. DNA is genetic information. That's how we know what you look like on the outside. That's how your body knows what you're going to look like on the inside. It's all based on genetic information from DNA. So those are our four main biomolecules: carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids. And so let's look at some of the words that we've talked about. Macromolecule. So that just means big molecules. So you have macro, you have micro. Macro is big, micro is small. The microscope helps you see small things. Okay. And a macromolecule can be broken down. For example, the carbohydrate can be broken down into simple, a complex carbohydrate can be broken down into simple carbohydrates. A protein can be broken down into amino acids, which are, you take a bunch of amino acids and put them together, and you'll learn this later, that makes a protein chain, as a matter of fact. Other words you'll see the prefix poly, which means many. Polygons was many sides in geometry. Polysaccharide would be many sugars linked together. Monosaccharide is one sugar put together. So mono means one, poly means many, and then we use the root word saccharide to mean sugar when we're talking about biomolecules. If you break down the word carbohydrates, carbo is the shortened version of carbone, which actually comes from French root, which is carbon or charcoal. And then hydrate, the reason your body has to stay hydrated is because you lose water as you sweat, as you work out, whatever. As you breathe, you're losing water, so you have to rehydrate your body. And so when you put those together, you get carbohydrate. And so those are the sugars that we talked about, and they can be easily broken down in the body depending. So carbohydrates, if you look at the endings of these types of words, carbohydrates typically end with the ose suffix. So, for example, sucrose, which is the sugar you eat, we call it table sugar. It is the white sugar you can buy at the store that you put in baking and cooking. And if you take white sugar and put it in a pan and slowly heat it up and stir it, you'll make caramel or caramel, depending on how you say it. Glucose is blood sugar. That's the sugar that our body has to have so that it can make sure that our body has the energy we need. People test their blood sugar. If your blood sugar is not correct, and I'm just simplifying it, that's diabetes. There's lots of aspects to that. Proteins typically end with the IN. For example, we have keratin, which is what our fingernails are made out of. It's the protein that hardens up, and that's where your fingernails and toenails come from. And you have things like albumin. So albumin is egg whites. And so you know that if you cook eggs, it starts off kind of a yellowish, runny liquid, and then it turns into kind of a white or hardened yellow substance. And so that's denaturing of proteins is what we call it. And then lastly, we have enzymes, which is a type of protein we're going to look at in just a minute. And typically the ending for that is ACE, amylase, lipase, protease. We'll see that in just a minute. The chart. And so remember I told you lip was fats. So lipase breaks down. It's an enzyme that breaks down fats. Okay. All right. So enzymes. So these are special types of proteins. These enzymes end in ACE. So example, lipase and amylase, which are found in the intestines of animals. Enzymes are also called catalysts. And a catalyst simply lowers the amount of energy you need to have a chemical reaction occur. So here's my example for you. If you go outside and run around the track at your school, that track is 800 meters. If you start and you run around it, then it's just like you're just a regular old chemical reaction, okay? You started, you ended, done. A catalyst would be if you had a rocket on your back and you start running, and all of a sudden that rocket shoots you around the track real fast till you end. Okay? Did it cause you to use as much energy? No. Did you end a lot quicker than you would just walking around the track? Yes. That is what an enzyme or catalyst does. So going back to the example, if you just walk around the track by your own self with your 2 feet, that's just a regular reaction. If you put a rocket ship in your back and you go around that track super fast, that's a catalyst. Now, there's a problem, though, with enzymes. Enzymes have to be very specific in where they work at. And so we have to worry about temperature and pH. causing problems with enzymes. So let's look at these charts. So get really good at looking at these because you're going to see these again. I guarantee it. Okay, so for temperature, notice if you watch, you'll notice that it's going up, increasing, and notice it says relative rate of enzyme activity. So this enzyme is going to work the best when you're about 30 to 40 degrees Celsius, okay? And this enzyme just happens to probably be one that works best at 37 degrees Celsius, which is your body temperature, roughly 98.6, 97.3 to 98.6, okay? And so about 37 degrees Celsius, that's your standard body temperature. So this enzyme is going to work great inside your body. So that's temperature. So the higher it goes, the more it's at working, and the better that temperature is for that enzyme. Are there enzymes that don't work well within our body temperature? A couple. Maybe they work at a lower temperature. Maybe they work at a higher temperature. Okay, so just make sure you read the graph. You're looking for that high point, and that tells you where the enzyme's working the best. Now over here we have pH. So 0 is low. 12 is what we consider a strong base, like ammonia. 0 would be like your stomach acid. And so notice we have a dotted line, which is gastric protease. Notice the ASE, so it's an enzyme. And we have a solid line, which is intestinal protease. So notice that our gastric protease, gastric would be your stomach, is best works at about 3. So in our stomach, we have acid. But we also have other things like bile and water and other things, saline solution. And so about 3 is the best place for this enzyme to work. But notice when you come over here, once you leave the stomach and go into the intestines, now that enzyme's not going to work as well. Now we have to have a different enzyme called intestinal protease. So they're still the same, but they're a little different in their chemical makeup when you get down to the nuts and bolts of it. But notice this one works best at about 9, a pH of 9, so a pretty decent sized base. Okay, and so that's how you read these type of charts. So remember, temperature and pH are what can affect enzymes. They only work in certain areas, certain temperatures, and certain pHs. And so now let's review in a minute. Let's see if we can do it. So remember, there are approximately 4 biomolecules that talk about within all organisms: carbohydrates, proteins, lipids, and nucleic acids. Each of these biomolecules contain the following elements, which is CHOMPs: carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, phosphorus, and sulfur. Okay, carbohydrates, also known as sugars and starches, provide energy, and they end usually in OSE. It's like sucrose and glucose. Proteins provide energy. They speed up reactions. Remember, that's enzymes. And they provide structural support. And we'll talk about that as we get into cell structures and cell organelles. And typically they end in IN, like keratin and albumin. Lipids provide some energy and are important building blocks for needed molecules. And we'll see that when we get into like cholesterol that's found within the cell membrane and the phospholipid bilayer. Okay, and then we have nucleic acids. So that's DNA. That's our genetic material that says, hey, my body looks like this on the outside and my body looks like this on the inside. All right. And then lastly, we have enzymes, remember, also called catalysts. They're a type of protein. Okay, so they're a type of protein, but just like your muscles are also a type of protein. Lowers energy and speeds up the chemical reaction. So remember our guy around the track. You're going around the track. That's a normal chemical reaction. You put a rocket on your back and you go around super fast. That's a catalyst. That's an enzyme helping speed up that chemical reaction. And then lastly, enzymes are very selective with their working conditions. So if it's too hot or too cold, or if their pH is too high or too low, it will affect that enzyme working, okay? For example, if it's 110 degrees outside in Houston, you probably don't want to work outside. That's fair enough. But if it's like 75 degrees in Houston, which doesn't ever happen hardly, you'll be more than happy to work at it. So that is biomolecules. Very important part of our body as you're going through eating. Think about these different things like carbohydrates, proteins, fats, and those things that make up the inside of your body. And as we go through biology, we'll constantly revert back to these biomolecules. We'll talk about, well, this biomolecule is used here, and this one's used here, and this one's used there. So can't wait to talk to you till Unit 2. Have a great one.